Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers, where we are back looking at the complete A to Z of PS2 Hidden Gems. Games that aren't always the best, but might still be worth a moment or two of your time. We are on the letter S now, and it was really another tough one as there's just so many games I could have included, but as always I've kept it to 10, so be sure to let me know what else I could have put in here. I do also want to say a big thank you to everyone who does keep giving me suggestions, and I have used quite a lot of them in this video. It genuinely helps when I'm making these. Anyway, how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and take a look at some games. Let's start in feudal Japan, or is it the Wild West? Well actually, it's both. This is Samurai Western, a really cool action hack and slash where you play as Gojiro, who is not a kaiju, he's just a samurai. And you go to the Old West trying to track down your brother Rando, who's gotten into a spot of bother. Being the bunch of racists that they are, the cowboys don't take too kindly to a stranger from another land coming to interfere with their business, so they do everything they can to try and kill you dead. The game is split into levels, all of which are fairly small, and gameplay is actually very simple. Levels are basically sandboxes filled with enemies, and your mission is pretty much just to kill all the enemies, and that's about it. But to do so is very fun, and there's a fairly deep combat system here. Levels range from towns in the Old West to saloons, caves, forts, plains in the Old Wild West, and so on. They all look good, and you'll meet a number of crazy over-the-top characters along the way, most of which try to kill you. When you're in the levels, you'll fight dozens of enemies. These come in a few flavours. You've got your standard cowboys with their 6-shooters, shotgun-wielding ones, fat blokes that throw dynamite at you, guys with knives, guys with boomerangs, and so on. There's often 5 or more on the screen at any one time for you to fight, but of course, being a samurai, you're very good at defending yourself. You've got the standard combo done by button mashing, and in fact, you only have one attack button. But you can also dash, jump, and dodge, and doing combinations of these things lead to new combos. And in fact, dodging is a huge mechanic here. As the old saying goes, you have brought a knife to a gunfight. But it is a pretty big knife, and if you're standing still and hammer the dodge button, you can swing your sword wildly to deflect bullets. Sometimes these go in random areas, other times you'll send them back to the person that fired them, killing them. If you're moving and you press the dodge button just at the right time, you will dodge any shots that are coming at you, and you get a cool notification to let you know. This is vital to staying alive, as surprisingly, being shot in the face means you die quite quickly. You also have cool things like being able to knock enemies down and grabbing their bodies and running around while using them as a human shield. If the enemy is still alive, they'll shoot their weapon, letting you take out enemies with friendly fire. Usually, once you've killed enough people, a boss will arrive. They are a lot tougher, and you'll want to learn their attacks if you're going to take them down. You earn coins from killing people, and getting enough will upgrade the weapon that you're using, and this is very important too. Between levels you get upgrade points, which you can use to upgrade your health, attack, defense, and so on. As well as that, you get accessories like a new hat or haircut or a guitar. You can equip a few of these, and each will give you various stat boosts, so choosing a loadout that works for you is important. Also, you get a load of new weapons, and you can choose the ones you want to use at the start of each level. This is more important than you'd think, as they each have different stances, fighting styles, and stats. This means that some weapons are better for jumping attacks, some for faster, weaker attacks, and some for more slower, powerful ones. It really is fun to try them all out, and you'll soon find your favourite. The game has a cool art style to it as well, and everything is suitably anime and over the top. All the characters are interesting, and it's cool to meet the wacky bosses along the way. The controls are also very good, and I've got no complaints there. Overall, this is a very fun game. It can get a bit repetitive if you play it for too long, but the fact that you can jump in and out and the game really helps. Well worth checking this one out. Here's one that was recommended to me. It is Shadow of Destiny from Konami, sometimes known as Shadow of Memories. This is a very odd game that I will try to explain, but will probably do a terrible job. You play as Ike, a generic Konami character, and you start off by walking down a street in a town, and you're suddenly murdered, which is always inconvenient. Luckily, rather than die like a good murder victim, instead you go to Limbo, where you're given a talk about how you get a second chance, and the game tries to explain its mechanics a bit. Basically, you're then given a time machine of sorts, but it can only let you go back in time to before you were murdered, which I guess makes sense. But also, it's not consistent and only works at certain times and for a certain number of times. You all know the time and date that you were killed, so your mission is to go back to the time of your murder and stop it from happening. This can be done in a few ways. For example, when you were killed, you were alone, so you go back in time and this time you make sure there are other people around you. Unfortunately, this doesn't actually stop you being killed, it just postpones it by a few hours and you're killed in a different way. So you go back in time to just before that murder, and you have to do various things to stop that murder from happening, and it's actually a pretty cool premise. So you spend a lot of time exploring the town and talking to various people in order to help them with whatever they're doing, so they'll help you out and do what you need them to stop you from being killed. Eventually though, you go back really far to a sort of medieval time where you meet a lot of people that you've been helping, but it's their ancestors, and you start to learn more about why this is all happening and so on. So I guess really the game is more of a puzzle game. There's no real combat here, it's just a case of being killed, then having a time limit where you have to figure out how to not be killed, in the way that you just saw yourself die. You meet lots of creepy, suspicious people that really give off Silent Hill vibes, and the story really did keep me interested here. It's definitely a game that I can see people not enjoying though. It can be confusing and is deliberately weird, but I like that kind of stuff. It's also quite slow paced. There are a few very long cutscenes that cannot be skipped, and it's kind of like an interactive movie, but it does have a fun premise. It gives off very budget title vibes with the graphics and how everything is presented, but I don't think it's bad by any means. If you like games that aren't really like anything else you've played, then I definitely recommend this one. It can actually be beaten fairly quickly, and there are multiple ways to solve various scenarios, each leading to a different ending, so it even has a lot of replay value. An interesting one for sure. Fighting game time now with the stupidly named Spectral vs Generations, which actually isn't a stupid name, as this is a crossover of two franchises that I've never heard of, Spectral Force and Generation of Chaos. It's a fighting game, so it has a story that I'm not fussed about, but all that matters is these fine fighters have come together to have a ruck. You have your usual game modes of arcade versus training and so on, and you pick your character and off you go. As you know, all the characters have their own special moves and fighting styles, as well as speed and strength, etc. You only have to worry about 4 buttons to attack, and the shoulder buttons let you dash and use an EX sort of move. It's the classic Street Fighter style inputs for doing special moves, so you'll be doing quarter circles and charge moves, and they're all very easy to pull off. Attacking your opponent builds up your special bar, letting you unleash a load of devastating ultra combos that do massive damage. In fact, the combos here are a big part of the game, and while it is easy to pick up and play, you will want to put some time in with a few characters on this one to see how it all works, and you will want to learn certain characters, who really do play quite differently from one another. You might need to stick with the same one for quite a while as you get used to their moveset. I wasn't very good, but still managed to do quite well, as the computer AI is fair but tough, at least on the default setting. I do quite like the graphics here, but I will say they look very 32-bit, and you could be excused for thinking you're playing a PS1 title, but it's still got good animation and I really like the variety in backgrounds. There's always quite a lot going on in them. And really that's all I need to say about this one. It's your standard 2D fighting game, but with good controls and a decent roster. You know the drill. If you like this sort of thing, give it a go. Here is Shadow of Rome from Capcom. This is another one that was recommended to me by you lovely folk, and it really is a cool action-adventure game set in ancient Rome. Caesar has been murdered because he wouldn't share his secret salad sauce recipe. From here, you then get to find out how this affects 2 very different characters. You've got a Roman soldier who's out fighting and conquering in various battlefields at Caesar's orders. Then you've got a dweeb, who is actually his brother, who is in Rome and trying to get to the bottom of who actually murdered him and why. If you're playing as the soldier, your main objective is to fight and kill as you receive the news of the emperor's death, and you try to make your way back to Rome in order to get bloody justice. You'll have to fight through hordes of enemies, mostly Viking or barbarian-like ones who are pretty savage. The levels aren't massive and tend to be pretty self-contained, but getting around them isn't always easy and will require you to explore and search for keys or other items to help you progress. As you'd expect, there's a lot of fighting here. Most of it is one-on-one, but sometimes you'll have a handful of enemies to contend with, and quite often you'll have other soldiers to back you up as well, which is really cool. The actual combat is very satisfying here, but can take a while to get used to. You can tell it was inspired by Breath of the Wild, as all weapons and armour break, meaning you're constantly swapping out weapons and armour of your dead enemies. This is cool, and you might start a level looking like a Roman, but by the end of it you'll be wearing barbarian helmets and have primitive axes or clubs for weapons, rather than a shiny sword. You've got separate buttons for your left and right arms, and can equip various swords and shields by pressing the corresponding button to pick them up. You'll want to take a shield when you can, as the combat is quite methodical. You can parry, block and dodge, and I actually really like how it all works here. It's also quite bloody, letting you chop limbs off of your enemies, which you can actually pick up and use to bludgeon people to death with, by the way. Once you're done killing, you'll usually then swap to the dweeb character who is trying to solve the murder mystery. These sections are more puzzle and stealth based. You can't really use weapons and will need to sneak around Rome and its various buildings trying to infiltrate the Senate and find out what's actually happened. You'll do the usual ducking behind stuff to hide from guards, but also you can bribe people, find disguises, and you can sometimes even smash pots on people's heads to knock them out. Doesn't he know how valuable Roman pottery is? Eventually the two characters' stories will intertwine, and it's all very well done. Something else that is really well done are the graphics, which are just incredible, and some of the best I've seen on the system. Now granted, I am playing this on the Steam Deck and some of it is upscaled, but it could really be passed off as an early Xbox 360 era game with great character models, animations and loads of really cool environments. I'm actually surprised this one doesn't get talked about all that often, as it's a really solid game. Sometimes the slow pace of it could drag, but on the whole it's a hard game to put down. I do definitely prefer the action scenes to the stealth ones, but either way, this is one I would say is a must-own for any PS2 player. Silpheed is a vertically scrolling shooter from Treasure and Working Designs. You'll never believe it, but alien bug robot things have appeared and are causing all sorts of problems, so you get in your spaceship and set out to blow them all to hell, just as all alien bug things should be. It's a fairly simple and standard shooter, but definitely not a bad one, after all it is Treasure. You spend most of your time going up the screen while waves of enemies appear. At the start of each mission you can choose from a number of weapons. You can equip 2 of them at a time. You start with a small selection of your standard laser blasts, but after each mission you unlock more and more weapons to use. You can equip them to whichever side of the ship you want to fire them from, left or right, and it doesn't really make a difference as to which one goes where. Then you fire the one you want by pressing either the left attack button or the right attack button, or you can fire them both at the same time just by pressing the X button, which I don't really understand why you wouldn't just do that the whole time. There's 9 weapons to unlock in total, and you end up with a great choice of rockets, lasers, bullets and all sorts. Some of these work better than others while combined, and it's really fun to figure out the best setup for you, though it can be tough while you're learning and sometimes you can choose a shit combination and really screw yourself over. Being a Treasure game, there's a ton of boss fights in here as well, and often you'll play levels that are basically just 1 or 2 bosses with very little in between. They're always fun though, and while I have to say some of the enemies and boss designs are quite boring, they were always challenging, spewing out loads of bullets for you to avoid. Thankfully you can take a few hits before you die, which is always handy, and if you like high scores, killing enemies quickly builds up a combo meter. The levels themselves are all what you'd expect from a shooter, ranging from destroyed cities, spaceports, lava levels, strange planets and so on, each with their own hazards and enemies, and the game does put up a decent challenge even if it doesn't do anything drastically original. Graphically, I really like how it looks. It's super smooth and has some really nice levels. As mentioned before, the enemies and bosses aren't too imaginative, but they look good enough. The controls are spot on and super smooth, and it's never the game's fault if you take damage. So yeah, if you're a fan of shooters, this one is well worth playing. It doesn't really break the mold, but it is fun and there's plenty of challenge and things to blow up. Sticking with Treasure, here is Stretch Panic, also known as Freakout. This is a strange game that's basically a boss rush mode. There is a story, which is that you are Linda, who lives with her 12 sisters. One day you get a strange delivery which has some monster things in it which take the 12 sisters, who are all very vain and shallow, and transforms them into abominations related to their particular vices. Kind of like the 7 deadly sins, but not really. Linda, who is good and pure, doesn't have any of that sort of nonsense, and instead her funky scarf, which she often got bullied for, gets all magic and has the power to stretch things for some reason. Nothing is really explained, but you never need it to be. All you need to know is that you have to go into each of the worlds that your sisters now inhabit and use your stretchy powers to smack them in the face and turn them back to normal before they're absorbed into a demon realm. You start out in a hub world with a bunch of levels available, and you'll need to unlock some more as you play. What you need to do is grab the door to open them and then fight the boss that's inside. Simple. Trouble is, you also need to earn points. Points are needed to open certain doors as well as pull off certain attacks, because nothing comes for free, you know. Luckily, there are EX levels. These are always free to enter and are populated by the game's only other enemy, women with huge boobs. That's right, the only other enemy in the game are women with massive tits, who are women who wished for them. Fair enough. You can visit these levels as often as you want to fight the big boobed ladies. Fighting well earns you points, and what you have to do is use your scarf to grab the women and then stretch them enough that you can fling yourself into them, or you can ping their bikini strap to hurt them. Doing this well gets you points, and when you have enough or have defeated all the tits, then you can go back to the hub world and open the boss door. You may remember a few seconds ago I also said you need points for certain attacks. That's because to see the true ending you need to finish each of the bosses off with your super special, which is done by grabbing an enemy and pressing L3 and R3 at the same time. This then saves their soul, but you'll need 5 points to be able to use the special move. If you want to get the real ending, this is what you have to do for every boss, and this means you will need to farm a fair few points, though it doesn't actually mean the game lasts all that long. There are only 12 bosses and a handful of the EX levels, which are optional for the most part. You can actually beat the game in about an hour once you've had a bit of practice, and it's actually kind of what the game seems to have been made for. It isn't a game that you're meant to pour hours into, looking into the story or anything like that. You're meant to just jump in and see how quickly you can get through it all. Graphics wise, it's fine, it's got a cool style to it, but it isn't particularly technically impressive, though I have to say the stretch mechanic is quite cool, as you can grab anything in the game and make it stretch. This might even be why the graphics aren't that detailed. It's got a wacky sense of humour and just a fun game to play. You will need to get used to how it all controls though. You can't move the camera at all, as the right stick is used to control your scarf, and it can feel a bit slow at times. It is really fun to figure out the bosses though. They all have weaknesses, and while they can be beaten by regular attacks, if you want to do well, you want to figure out the patterns and do certain scripted events that do massive damage. But this is one of those quirky games that you'll probably either love or hate. Personally, I have a lot of fun with it. It's crazy and strange and doesn't take itself seriously at all, and is definitely a good way to spend an hour or two. Sub-Rebellion is a really cool submarine arcade action game that reminds me of a 3D version of In the Hunt. It has a pretty complicated story that revolves around being in the future, and 2/3 of the planet is now underwater, and there's 2 factions fighting for world domination. Thankfully, the side that you're on want to do it for good reasons, whereas the others are clearly evil bastards. So the game puts you in a load of varied missions where you're given objectives to complete and a load of enemies to kill, and the game is all out action. You spend your whole time in the submarine, which is kitted out with various weapons. You've got lasers, machine guns, rockets, missiles, and so on. All of your weapons have unlimited ammo, but some will take a few seconds to cool down or reload. Tapping the fire button shoots your machine guns, and holding it down lets you lock onto enemies and fire your rockets, torpedoes, or missiles, whatever you've got equipped. You even have special weapons, which do have limited ammo. These are things like decoys you can use to distract enemies. You can also surface whenever you want with the circle button. You'll need to do this a fair bit to take out the land units and bases of the enemies, and it can be tough to keep track of where enemies are. Thankfully, you do get told when you're being attacked from above or below when you aren't there yourself. What I really love though is your sonar. Pressing the X button while underwater will scan the area, and you get to see what's lurking around corners or behind obstacles. This is helpful when tracking down enemies. You'll also be able to use this to find sunken treasure. This is especially handy as finding it earns you money to spend on upgrades between missions. This can be new weapons, more armor, better speed, and so on. It's great and very addictive. Controlling the sub is good, but definitely not all that easy. It is actually very responsive for a submarine, though it does have some speed issues and you can't strafe left and right, which makes avoiding enemy fire really tough. You can strafe up and down though, if that's still classed as strafing, which helps a fair bit. The missions do have a bit of variety, but nothing too crazy. You'll be blowing a lot of stuff up for the most part, and there's also times where you've got to find sunken objects, take out bases, protect other ships, and so on. Some levels are timed as well, making things tricky, especially if you want to find all the treasure in those levels. Thankfully, you can replay missions whenever you want from the map to try and get a high score or find things that you've missed. Graphically, the game is excellent. I really like the art style here with chunky vehicles, and it plays super smooth too. I'd never heard of this game, and I actually thought it was going to be a bit of a crappy budget title, but in fact it's a really good submarine game that I've already gone back to after recording this to see what the next few missions are. It does a lot right, but my biggest issue with it is probably that there's no checkpoints, so if you do die, especially near the end of a mission, you've got to restart from the very beginning every time. And this also includes collecting any of the treasure and stuff you might have gotten. This did annoy me a few times, but you kind of get used to it. But definitely give the game a try. I bet it will surprise you. Here is Super Farm, a game I had to play just based on the box art, and I've got to say it's nothing like I expected. It was only released in Europe, and I can kind of see why. The story here, and stick with me, is that there are a bunch of horny animals on a farm. Unfortunately, they're all male. When the game starts, they are in the middle of drawing straws to see who has to dress up as the female for the other ones to bang. And nope, I'm not making that up, it literally happens in the opening movie. Luckily for the pig, who did get the short straw, just before he gets raw-dogged by the turkey, sheep and rabbit, the farmer turns up with a female chicken. So then the game starts, and it's a party game where you have to complete various missions and games with your chosen farm animal, so you get to bang the chick. And yes, that is all absolutely true. So you choose from the farm animals, each of which have the usual speed and strength stats, as you play through a bunch of levels, each of which take place in various farm and city locations, and later in the game even some more wacky ones. Each level will give you certain objectives to complete, and it's always against another one of the animals, and sometimes more than one. You have simple games where you've got to collect a weapon and smash your opponent in the face, knocking their teeth out, then you've got to collect a certain amount of the teeth. Other levels will see you collecting flowers for the chicken to win her favour, and one level even has you collecting cats and delivering them to the chicken while she's taking a shit, because she has to wipe her ass with cats. Again, I'm not making that up. There's other modes like capture the flag, and there's races, and so on. Between each level you get a cutscene which sets everything up, and you can't help but watch these every time, as you never know what the hell is going to happen. It's absolutely bonkers and I like it. The game actually looks pretty good as well, with a suitably cartoon art style that wouldn't look out of place for a 90s Nickelodeon show. The levels are all small arenas, but they're packed with hazards like electricity, deep water, and things that will knock you over if you're not careful. The game's not particularly easy either. The computer AI is quite unforgiving and will try to use the scenery against you, and racing them to the best weapons and items is pretty common. The controls are actually very good here. It's responsive and you only have a few buttons to worry about. Also, for each game there is a played tutorial which you can do that explains exactly what you need to do. These are handy, but they do take quite a long time to go through, and a simple text explanation probably would have been enough. Thankfully they are all skippable. This is a game that is obviously meant to be played with other players, and I can imagine it being a lot of fun if you do. But of course I've got no friends, so I wasn't able to try that out. I thought this was going to be one of those games that was super expensive, but that isn't the case. However, I can't imagine it would be all that common, so I really do recommend picking it up if you ever see it in the wild. Of course, if you're outside the UK, you won't ever find it, and we'll have to get the emulator fired up. But that's okay, as I imagine most people won't want to play it anyway, though you should. It's crazy ass fun. If you want to stick with the strange stuff, then you'll definitely want to play Super Galdelic Hour. Released only in Japan, this is a 1 or 2 player party game where you choose from a handful of females who certainly are a handful, and then you battle it out in a bunch of titillating mini-games to see who is the best. It's a simple game with not a lot of content, unless you're talking about what's in their underwear. The 4 characters you choose from all play the same, the only difference being the proportions of their bouncy bits. Once you've chosen your favourite shape, you then get assigned a random opponent and are thrown into a bunch of short games. These range from rope jumping, where you've got to time your button presses correctly, pie splatting contests, where you also need to time your button presses correctly, butt bashing competitions, where you have to use your arse to push the other person into water, whack-a-mole, wood chopping, and so on. None of the games are complicated, but actually they're kind of fun to play. Almost all of them are timing based and making sure you press the correct buttons at the right time. It's very simple, and before each game you're given an explanation of how they work. It's all in Japanese, but it's well illustrated, so you won't need to understand the language to know what's happening. At the end of 3 or 4 games that you play, you'll hopefully be crowned the winner. You earn points from how well you perform in the games previously, and the points can be traded in the shop for new outfits and accessories for the girls, but only for the one that you won the points for. So the game's got a good way of forcing you to replay it a few times with every character if you want to unlock everything and the more revealing outfits. And actually, I replayed the game 3 times, which isn't many, but enough to tell you everything you need to know about the game, and I didn't get any of the games repeated, so there must be quite a few in there. I don't actually know how many in total, there's at least 12 though, I can tell you that much. You get little scenes between the games as well, where the characters flail and bounce around for no reason, other than this is a Japanese game. But as it's Japanese, it embraces the craziness and uses it really well, and unlocking things is actually kind of addictive. The graphics here are excellent, and I suppose there's not a lot for the game to show on screen, which means they're able to put a lot more detail into everything, and the jiggle is excellent, even if not particularly accurate. But yeah, this is a fun time that is a crazy short game that's worth playing with a friend just to see who's the jiggliest. And finally for today, here is Snoopy and the Red Baron, a game that is way better than it has any right to be. Surprisingly, this is a combat flight sim where you take control of Snoopy and eventually his friends when you've unlocked them. The story goes that Snoopy and the Red Baron are in a war that is a fictional version of World War I, and the Red Baron kidnaps Charlie Brown, who's making plans for a bomb that could end the war. Yeah, it's pretty deep for a Snoopy game. So, as Snoopy, who is a pilot, which anyone who reads the comics already knows, you get in your plane and you have to complete a whopping 22 missions, which give you a ton of different objectives. These involve shooting down other planes, destroying enemy ships and tanks, protecting various other good things, and so on. You know, that sort of thing. The missions all take place in a few locations, and each one is a medium-sized sandbox with plenty of things in there for you to do. There's new weapons like homing rockets and bombs that you can find, and you'll need to even buy them from the shop. There's also balloons you can collect, which, if you get enough, will unlock various secrets. There's money you can find in the levels as well, which you'll need to use to buy the new weapons, and there's also letters in each level which spell the names of the other characters. When you've got them all, you can then buy that character and use them in the game. Each one has its own stats and plane and that sort of thing. Probably the most surprising thing is just how well the game plays. It's super smooth and the controls are fantastic, letting you fly, barrel roll and do some acrobatics with ease. You'll also need to use all of these moves as the enemies are a lot tougher than you'd probably think, chasing you down and firing a range of weapons at you that you'll need to avoid. As you can see, the graphics are excellent, it all looks really good with some excellent looking models, and I really like the cartoon style. There's surprisingly little to complain about here as well. Some of the missions are quite repetitive, and actually some of them are really damn tricky, and it does put up a challenge. It can still be beaten relatively easy though once you're used to it all. You might just need to go back to a few levels if you want to find everything. But it's basically a game that is well worth playing. It was only released in North America, so if you're in Blighty like me, you have to be a scumbag and emulate it, unless someone wants to swap a copy for Super Farm. But if you can play it, you definitely should. After all, it's Snoopy. Who doesn't love Snoopy? So there you go, 10 games for the PlayStation 2 starting with the letter S that you might not have tried, and if you have, well then you're a better person than me. As always, let me know what other games could have been included for this letter, and any for the upcoming letters, and I'll see if I can shoehorn them in. Oh, and I should plug my Patreon. I was told off by Belt Buckle Bill because I never mention it. I have more content on there for you to enjoy, including even more reviews, podcasts, gaming challenges, and even the game's too spicy for YouTube, all for less than the price of a cup of coffee every month. Link is in the description below if you want to check it out. But now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.